In the ancient lands of Nepal, amidst the majestic Himalayas, a young monk arrived at a valley on an autumn morning, when golden leaves danced in the wind like tiny flames suspended in the air. His bamboo staff marked his gentle steps on the damp earth, while his simple, faded robe contrasted with the lushness of the nature around him. He had left the main temple following the instructions of his elder master. Go to the valley of the three mountains and learn what only silence can teach. The valley was renowned for its peculiar geography. Three towering mountains forming a perfect triangle, embracing a small village at its center. Local villagers believed the mountains were ancient deities who, in times long past, decided to protect this sacred place. Among the whispered legends of the elders, it was said that the mountains themselves chose who could remain in the valley. As he entered the village, the young monk was immediately noticed. His silent steps and serene posture caught the attention of the villagers, who had not seen such a young practitioner demonstrating such devotion in a long time. An elderly woman, selling flowers at the local market, was the first to approach him. "Young monk, your presence brings light to our humble valley. I can see in your eyes the compassion of 1,000 Buddhas." The woman's words quickly spread like pollen on a spring breeze. Within hours, numerous villagers began seeking the young monk's presence. They brought offerings, fresh fruits, newly baked bread, and delicate fabrics. Each gift was accompanied by increasingly elaborate praises. "Your aura shines brighter than the noonday sun. Your wisdom must surpass that of the ancient masters. Surely, you are a manifestation of Avalokiteshvara." The young monk, who until then had maintained his practice in relative solitude at the main temple, began to feel something unfamiliar growing within him. Each compliment was like a drop of honey, slowly sweetening his perception of himself. His once simple and focused meditation routine began to be interrupted by thoughts of the villagers' kind words. Mornings, once dedicated to silent contemplation, were now filled with constant visits. Villagers brought their troubles, asking for advice and blessings. One mother even claimed her child had been healed from a fever simply by touching the hem of the young monk's robe. Rumors of this supposed miraculous healing spread quickly, drawing even more people to him. In his small hut on the outskirts of the village provided by a wealthy merchant, who insisted on hosting the Enlightened One, the young monk began to notice subtle changes in his practice. His meditation, once clear as a mountain spring, was now clouded by expectations. Each time he sat to meditate, his mind wandered to the words of admiration he received daily. The three mountains, seemingly silent observers of the situation, cast different shadows on the young monk's hut throughout the day. It was as if they were trying to communicate something through their shifting silhouettes, a warning he, intoxicated by the praises, could not yet understand. At night, lying on his simple bed, the young monk began having unsettling dreams. He saw himself growing until he touched the sky, larger than the three mountains, while the villagers knelt in worship. He woke up startled, cold sweat dripping down his forehead, but he quickly rationalized these dreams as manifestations of his spiritual progress. The power the villagers placed in their words of praise began taking deep root in the young monk's mind. Each compliment was like a seed planted in fertile soil, growing rapidly and altering his perception of reality. Without realizing it, he was surrendering control of his inner peace to the opinions of others, allowing external validation to define his worth. The words of his elder master at the main temple, "Learn what only silence can teach," were beginning to fade amid the constant noise of praise. The silence, meant to be his greatest teacher on this journey, was being suffocated by the unending murmur of admiration. This first part of the story shows us how even a dedicated practitioner can easily be caught in the seductive web of external recognition. The young monk, in his inexperience, did not realize he was trading true spiritual practice for an illusory substitute, the applause of others. The three mountains, in their silent wisdom, continued to watch, waiting for the moment when the young monk would be ready to learn his true lesson. The sunset painted the valley skies in shades of amber as the young monk began noticing subtle changes in his behavior. The constant praise from the villagers had taken root in his mind, and now, as he sat to meditate, his thoughts drifted toward the words of admiration he received daily. His routine, once dedicated to simplicity and detachment, began to shift. The young monk now spent more time choosing which robe to wear, concerned with his appearance. His gestures, once natural, became calculated, as though he was perpetually aware of the eyes watching him. Even his walk changed. There was now a certain pomp in his steps, an exaggerated awareness of his supposed importance. During shared meals with the villagers, he started sitting in elevated positions, unquestioningly accepting the seat of honor offered to him. His words, once sparse and deliberate, grew more elaborate and frequent. He shared teachings not out of necessity, but for the pleasure of seeing the awe-struck expressions of his listeners. At night, in his cabin, the young monk began collecting the gifts he received. Small treasures offered by the villagers now adorned his previously austere space. A fine silk shawl from a wealthy merchant, a jade bowl, a gift from a grateful family, a golden Buddhist statue presented by the village council. Each object carried not just its material beauty, but also the weight of the praise accompanying it. His meditations, once profound and meaningful, became shallow. Instead of seeking emptiness and understanding, his mind wandered through fantasies of grandeur. He imagined himself as a great master, revered by crowds. He envisioned performing miracles, healing the sick with a mere touch. Pride, like a poisonous vine, increasingly wrapped itself around his heart. His dreams changed as well. Once unsettling, they now became enticingly seductive. He dreamed of massive temples built in his honor, of pilgrims traveling from distant lands just to receive his blessing. In his dreams, even the three mountains bowed before him. One day, while walking through the village, he heard a child crying. The girl's mother, upon seeing him, immediately pushed her toward him. "Touch her, venerable one. Your sacred touch will ease her pain." The young monk, intoxicated by his own prestige, did not hesitate. He placed his hand on the child's head, murmuring words he imagined to be sacred. The girl stopped crying, more out of fear than anything else, but the villagers interpreted it as a miracle. News of the miraculous healing spread quickly. Soon, lines began forming outside his cabin. The sick, the elderly in pain, mothers with feverish children, all came seeking his sacred touch. The young monk, entirely lost in his own self-importance, started believing he truly possessed special powers. The three mountains, silent witnesses to his transformation, cast ever-darkening shadows over the valley. It was as if nature itself was trying to warn him of the perilous path he was treading. But the young monk, blinded by pride, could no longer interpret these signs. His spiritual practice, which should have been a path to liberation, had turned into a gilded prison. Each word of praise, every bow, every gift was another brick in the walls of his prison of vanity. Silence, his true teacher, had been entirely drowned out by the clamor of his own self-importance. The elders of the valley, those who truly understood the ancient teachings, watched with concern. They saw in the young monk a familiar pattern they had witnessed before, the cycle of spiritual pride, one of the subtlest and most dangerous traps on the path to enlightenment. This second part of the story illustrates how the power we grant to others' opinions can transform even the most sincere spiritual practice into an exercise of ego. The young monk, who had come to the valley in search of silence, was now completely enveloped by the noise of his own significance, unknowingly preparing himself for a lesson that would profoundly alter his understanding. The air in the valley of the three mountains began to change subtly. Like the first cold breeze announcing the arrival of winter, rumors started circulating through the village. It all began when the blacksmith's daughter, the one supposedly healed by the young monk, fell ill again, this time more gravely than before. His touch had no power after all. People whispered in the corners of the market. Maybe he's an imposter, others murmured in the tea houses. The same voices that once sang his praises now sowed seeds of doubt. The merchant who had offered him the cabin began to publicly question whether he had made a mistake in hosting someone so young and inexperienced. The gifts dwindled, and the lines outside his cabin began to disappear. The young monk, who had built his identity on the fragile foundation of others' approval, felt as if the ground were vanishing beneath his feet. His meditation, already shallow, became nearly impossible. Each time he sat to practice, his mind was consumed by thoughts of the criticism he heard. During his walks through the village, he noticed how the villagers' gazes had changed. Where there was once reverence, now there was distrust. Those who previously bowed in his presence now avoided crossing his path. The respectful silence that used to surround him transformed into barely concealed whispers. The situation worsened when a group of merchants arrived in the village with news of a true master living in the distant mountains. Now he is an enlightened being, they said, unlike this pretentious young man here. The comparisons were like sharp daggers piercing his inflated ego. The young monk's suffering deepened when he learned that some villagers had started meeting in secret to discuss his false teachings. His words, once regarded as pearls of wisdom, were now dissected and criticized. Every gesture of his was seen as arrogance, every silence as proof of his ignorance. At night, alone in his cabin, his silent tears mingled with the sound of rain pelting the roof. The gifts that once adorned his space now seemed to mock his downfall. The golden Buddha statue in particular seemed to gaze at him with disappointment. His dreams of grandeur were replaced by nightmares in which he was pursued by whispering shadows. He woke up in a cold sweat, his heart pounding erratically in his chest. The peace he once knew now felt like a distant memory, belonging to another life, another self. One day, as he walked dejectedly through the village, he overheard a child ask her mother, "Why does the monk look so sad?" The woman's response was cutting. "Because he's not a true monk, dear. He's just someone lost, pretending to be wise." The three mountains continued their silent vigil, but now their shadows felt different to the young monk. They no longer seemed to protect him. They felt as though they judged him, constantly reminding him of his fall. The valley, which once seemed like a welcoming paradise, had turned into a place of torment. His daily practice, which should have been his refuge, became a source of anguish. Every attempt at meditation was interrupted by memories of the criticism, every moment of contemplation disturbed by doubts about his worth. The power he had given to others' opinions now turned against him with devastating force. The village elders, who had foreseen his downfall, quietly observed. They knew this was a necessary part of the journey, a moment when the practitioner realizes the futility of building inner peace on the shifting sands of others' opinions. This third chapter of the story shows us how the same power we elevate can ultimately destroy us. The young monk, who had allowed himself to be carried away by praise, now drowned in a sea of criticism. His true practice, which should have been rooted in inner silence, had been entirely forgotten amidst the clamor of external opinions. The three mountains waited patiently, knowing that only when the suffering reached its peak could true learning begin. The valley, in its ancient wisdom, prepared to reveal its most profound lesson to the young monk, who was finally ready to understand the true meaning of the power we give to others. It was on a particularly cold morning that the young monk's fate began to change. As he walked dejectedly through the outskirts of the valley, he came across an old monk sitting beneath an ancient tree. The elder, his shaved head glistening in the sunlight and deep wrinkles etched with the stories of countless meditations, exuded a peace the young monk had long forgotten. "Why do you carry so many unnecessary burdens?" the old monk asked without opening his eyes. The young monk, startled by the directness of the question, sat on the damp grass before him. For the first time in weeks, he felt safe enough to share his torment. He spoke of the praise that had elevated him and the criticism that had destroyed him. He described how he had been adored and was now despised. His words flowed like a torrent, laden with hurt and confusion. The old monk listened in silence, his serene expression unwavering. "Who holds the keys to your happiness?" the elder asked when the young man finally felt quiet. "The villagers," the young monk replied without hesitation. The old monk smiled with compassion. "And when did you hand them something so precious?" Those words struck the young monk like lightning in a clear sky. He realized he had willingly given control of his inner peace to strangers. Every compliment accepted, every criticism absorbed, was another key to his happiness given away freely. The old monk continued, "If you give someone the power to make you happy with sweet words, you also give them the power to destroy you with bitter ones." He picked up a dry leaf from the ground and blew on it gently. "See how the leaf dances with the wind. It does not resist, nor does it cling. It simply is." For hours, master and disciple spoke beneath the ancient tree. The elder shared stories of his own journey, moments when he too had become lost in the labyrinth of others' opinions. He spoke of the difference between listening to advice with wisdom and surrendering control of one's inner peace. "The 3 mountains that surround this valley," the elder said, pointing to the towering peaks, "remain unmoved regardless of what is said about them. They do not grow with praise nor shrink with criticism. Their nature is simply their nature." As the sun began to set, the old monk rose to leave. Before departing, he shared one final teaching. True practice is not in being adored or despised, but in remaining centered amidst both. The power we give to others is a choice, and we can choose differently at any moment. That night, alone in his cabin, the young monk reflected deeply on the elder's words. He looked at the gifts piled in the corner symbols of a power he had willingly handed over. For the first time in a long while, he felt a flicker of the peace he had lost. The 3 mountains, bathed in moonlight, seemed different now. They were no longer judges of his journey, but silent witnesses to his awakening. The valley, in its ancient wisdom, had provided precisely the encounter he needed. This 4th moment in the story marks the beginning of true understanding. The young monk started to see that the power we give to others is a conscious choice, and the true freedom lies in holding the keys to our own happiness. In the silence of the night, as the villagers slept and the stars shone over the 3 mountains, a subtle transformation began within the heart of the young monk. A realization was taking root, one that no praise could grant and no criticism could destroy. By a small stream near his cabin, the young monk encountered the old master once again. This time, the elder carried an antique mirror, framed in dark wood polished by time. Without a word, he extended the mirror to the young monk. "What do you see?" the master asked. The young monk gazed at his reflection. Deep circles under his eyes from sleepless nights, a thin face marked by worry. "I see someone who is lost," he replied honestly. The master then began to speak words of extravagant praise, exalting extraordinary qualities in the young monk. "Look at your reflection. Has it changed because of my words?" The young monk looked again. His image remained the same. Next, the master voiced sharp criticisms, pointing out flaws and imperfections. "And now, has your reflection altered?" Again, the image in the mirror stayed unaltered, reflecting the same silent truth. "The words of others are like passing clouds in the sky," said the master. "They may cast momentary shadows, but they do not change the essence of the sky. Likewise, praise and criticism do not alter your true nature." For hours, they practiced different exercises with the mirror. The master asked the young monk to smile, frown, and close his eyes, demonstrating that only his own actions could change his reflection. "When we allow others to define our worth," the master continued, It is as if we are trying to see our reflection through their eyes. But those eyes are like distorted mirrors, colored by their own experiences, fears, and desires. The young monk began to realize that he had been living through the distorted reflections of others' opinions. Praise was a mirror that made him appear larger than he was. Criticism, a mirror that diminished him. True practice, the master taught, is staying true to your real reflection, regardless of the mirrors others present to you. Like the three mountains, which remain majestic even when shrouded in clouds or mist. As night fell, the master gifted the young monk the mirror. Use it not to see your appearance, but to remind yourself that your essence remains unchanged by the winds of others' opinions. This fifth part of the story reveals a profound lesson on authenticity and self-awareness. The mirror became a powerful symbol of the unchanging truth that exists beyond external perceptions, showing the young monk that the power over his worth and inner peace had always been in his own hands. In the stillness of that night, gazing at his reflection under the starlight, the young monk began reclaiming the keys to his own happiness, one by one, from those to whom he had so carelessly given them. On the final sunrise in the Valley of the Three Mountains, the young monk gathered all the villagers in the central square. With a calm voice, markedly different from the one he once used to impress, he shared the story of his journey, how he was lost in praise, drowned in criticism, and ultimately discovered his true strength. "Each of you," he said, "holds a piece of the power I once gave away willingly. Today, I come to reclaim it, not with anger or resentment, but with gratitude for the lesson you've taught me." The old master, watching quietly from a distance, smiled as he saw his disciple finally understand. The young monk continued his practice in the valley, but now in a transformed way. The words of others, whether sweet or bitter, no longer had the power to disturb his inner peace. The villagers noticed the change. He was no longer the monk who sought their approval, nor the one who hid from their criticism. He had become someone who had found his center, like the three mountains, unshaken by the winds of others' opinions. This story teaches us that true power lies in refusing to hand over control of our inner peace to others. When we allow others' opinions to define our worth, we become prisoners of an emotional roller coaster rising with praise and plummeting with criticism. The path to liberation is understanding that, just as the three mountains remain steadfast regardless of what is said about them, our essence remains unchanged by the words of others. We are the sole rightful guardians of the keys to our happiness. As the old master often said, not giving power to others does not mean isolating yourself or ignoring wise counsel, but staying centered in your own truth, like the reflection in a mirror, which remains unaltered no matter what is said about it.